Before we went to Mount Stewart, Hazel had reminded me of Winston's desire to know what I thought of the state of affairs in Ireland. Between us, we sent him the following letter. My dear Minister of War, you asked me the other day what I thought of my country's state, and I hadn't the courage to tell you. But if one artist may speak to another, I will give you my beliefs. The Prime Minister has said that he is prepared for 1 million casualties and a 5 years war. I believe that 10 million and a 50 years war wouldn't bring about the result he desires. I believe that Ireland will never be governed by Westminster, the Vatican or Ulster without continuous bloodshed. I also believe that the removal of the castle and all its works, leaving Irishmen to settle their own affairs, is the only solution left. I also believe that the removal of the castle and all its works, leaving Irishmen to settle their own affairs, is the only solution left. I am convinced with the knowledge I possess of my countrymen that such a situation would make her one of your staunchest allies instead of an avowed enemy for all time. Love is stronger than hate. Yours, Hazel and John. Things in Dublin were getting pretty bad when an invitation came to Hazel to meet Lloyd George at dinner at Sir Philip Sassoon's. Now is your chance, said I to Hazel, to do something for Ireland. When she returned, she said that he was a wizard right enough. He'd made her feel so interested in herself that the Irish question was put in the background. She'd never met anyone with greater charm, and she was sure of his sympathetic treatment of the Irish. Next morning she read in the Times that Lloyd George had the trouble well in hand, and that some 1,000 black and tans had landed and were driving all before them, terrifying the rebels into submission and getting their own back. She was so disappointed that some time afterwards, when an official letter came stating that the Prime Minister desired to place my name before the King as one deserving recognition, she counselled declining the honour on the ground that Mr. was more distinguished than Sir. But Lady Lavery had a pleasing sound, so I accepted. Men always blame their wives on such occasions. We both wondered who'd been working to bring the distinction about, and it's only now that it occurs to me that it must have been the night at Philip Sassoon's. England and Ireland were at war, black and tans and Republicans. I told Winston that I was going to Ireland to paint Michael Collins. Be careful, my dear John. Our men are not all good shots. But I wasn't able to go, and even if I had, I didn't quite see how my sitter could have been expected to sit. At last the treaty negotiations were underway. Hazel got in touch with Colin's sister, and one morning he walked into my studio, a tall young Hercules with a pasty face, sparkling eyes and a fascinating smile. I helped him off with a heavy overcoat to which he clung, excusing himself by saying casually, "There's a gun in the pocket." He came over, as everyone knows, on a safe conduct with Griffith, Gavin Duffy, Barton, Duggan and Erskine Childers. De Valera had been over a week or two before but had failed to come to terms, and now sent these representatives in the hope that a treaty might result. De Valera came to sit for a couple of hours. I was naturally more interested in what he looked like than in what he said, something to the effect that the mass of the people were like sheep in that they run after each other. Can't remember what called forth the remark. The statement wasn't new to me. My regret is that I had so little time to paint him. I had more time with his delegates. Hazel was anxious that they should meet Englishmen of importance concerned with the Irish question, and this resulted in many dinner parties and other functions. But there was one delegate who held out, Erskine Childers. I had him on the telephone once or twice, but he wouldn't be induced to come, not even to a meal. By many it was believed that had it not been for Hazel, there would have been no treaty, certainly not at the time it was signed. She'd given up Erskine Childers as impossible to move, but she'd overcome Arthur Griffith's objections. Michael Collins stood firm to the last minute. He seemed to have lost his temper. Even I, whose head was never really out of the paint pot, could see that he who loses his temper in argument is lost, and told him so, but I failed to convince him. Eventually, after hours of persuasion, Hazel prevailed. She took him to Downing Street in her car that last evening, and he gave in. Yet he knew, knowing our queer race, that in signing he might well be signing his death warrant. Neither friend nor foe ever accused this man of lacking courage. One night at dinner, Hazel had on one side of her Lord French and on the other Michael Collins. Looking across at him, Lord French said, "This is the first time I've had the pleasure of meeting you, Mr. Collins." "It's not the first time I've seen your lordship," said Collins. "For a couple of months ago you were by yourself near the lodge and the boys surrounded you. But I called them off. I thought it so brave of you." "London," said French, "is the best place after all to meet people. For a considerable time I was on the heels of Duet in South Africa, and only caught up with him in London here at dinner." There was one Englishman whose name seldom appeared in print, but who was working night and day behind the scenes to bring about a settlement. He was the liaison officer between the two countries, known to his friends as Andy Cope, and to the world as Sir Alfred Cope, KCB, etc., Assistant Under-Secretary for Ireland and Clerk of the Privy Council. In the following letter to Hazel he includes me, but he was mistaken, as were many others, in giving me credit for work I cannot lay claim to, and for virtues that I do not possess. 18 Abingdon Street, Westminster, SW1, 30th of June, 1923. Dear Lady Lavery, I want to thank you and Sir John very sincerely for your kindness to me last night, and indeed the many kindnesses you have shown me throughout the time I have had the good fortune to know you. Forgive my saying so, but I've closely watched the work you and Sir John have set out to accomplish from the first day we met, when Winston hurried me round to your house. You are two wonderful people carrying out in a wonderful way a truly gigantic task, the task of getting Protestant England to see some virtue in Catholic Ireland. This is indeed a most gigantic task, full of disappointments and perils for those who undertake it, and I speak from experience. It is a great task, but it has a great goal. And though you and Sir John may never see its accomplishment, yet you have taken it a long way towards the desired end, and you have my sincerest good wishes. The difficulty of the task lies in the fact that Protestant England has deep-rooted antipathies towards Catholic Ireland. I expected it from the first, but always hoped against it. But now, with much reluctance, I am forced to accept it. However, I am convinced that these antipathies can be removed, and that you and Sir John are travelling the only road to remove them. England is slow-moving, and just as she is slow to transfer her affections, so she is slow to remove her hatreds. I wish it were otherwise in the case of Catholic Ireland. Shortly after I arrived in Ireland, I set myself the same task that you have undertaken, and in accepting my present job, I thought I might get a better opportunity of pursuing my ideal. But I'm afraid I've been brought to a temporary halt. Temporary, I truly hope and believe. For my attachment to a really great but sadly maligned statesman has clipped my wings, and I must wait for them to grow again. But you and Sir John can and must go on, for you are doing big things, and your power to do big things is increasing daily. As for last night, it was magnificent. It was an experience for me that will fill my thoughts for weeks to come. There were small men and small women, and great men and great women. And among the men stood out Winston. How big he seems to me, and how pleased I was that although the Irish Treaty was mainly responsible for his fall from office, yet he gave me a cheery welcome. And also among what I feel to be the great ones, there were Sir John and yourself, working with splendid anxiety towards the great end. More when I see you. Ever yours sincerely, A. Cope.